The city was waking up slowly, as if reluctant to return to its usual rhythm. The sky was a pale wash of silver and blue, and a thin mist hovered above the streets, softening the hard edges of concrete and steel. Somewhere in the distance, traffic murmured like the ocean at low tide. The chaos of the night before had dissolved into quiet, leaving behind the smell of rain and the faint hum of a world trying to forget. Daniel walked alone. His coat was still damp at the edges, and his shoes made faint ripples and puddles that reflected the morning light. Every step felt heavier now, not from exhaustion but from the weight of knowing, the kind of knowing that changes the way a person looks at everything. Even the simplest things, the flicker of a cafe sign, the laughter of a stranger, the steam rising from a manhole. Evelyn had stayed behind at the bureau to process evidence. She had offered to file the report together, but Daniel had declined. There were some moments that couldn't be shared. The quiet aftermath, the fragile space between victory and loss. He needed to feel it to understand what it meant, before words turned it into something smaller than it really was. He found himself back where it had all begun. The fast food restaurant with the flickering sign, the one where an argument over a refund had spiraled into a revelation that unmasked an empire. The door creaked as he pushed it open. The smell of frying oil and coffee filled the air, familiar and grounding. Morning light streamed through the greasy windows, cutting through the haze like old film grain. The place was almost empty now. A teenager behind the counter looked up, half awake, and offered a polite smile. The same counter where it had started. The same register. But everything felt different. Daniel sat in the corner booth, the one facing the window. He ordered a black coffee. When it came, he let it sit for a moment, untouched. The steam rose in lazy spirals, curling and disappearing into the air. A reminder that even warmth was temporary. He watched the people outside. A delivery driver unloading boxes. A woman hurrying across the street with her coat pulled tight. Two children chasing each other through puddles. Ordinary lives moving forward, unaware of how close their world had come to collapsing under the weight of greed and deception. He thought of Porter. The look in his eyes as he was taken away. Not rage, not regret, but something Daniel couldn't name. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was the recognition that the fight was over, even if neither of them had really won. Porter's words echoed faintly. "You'll destroy everything." And maybe, in a way, he had. The Bureau's public image was already unraveling. The media had latched onto the story. Leaked footage of the warehouse, whispers of classified materials hidden in plain sight. The government had launched investigations. Careers were ending, reputations dissolving, but what lingered deeper wasn't the scandal. It was the question of what justice really meant when the truth itself could topple systems. The coffee had gone cold. Daniel finally took a sip anyway. The bitterness grounded him. A voice broke through his thoughts, gentle, uncertain. "Excuse me. Are you the guy from the news?" He looked up. A young man stood near the table holding a tray of food. He couldn't have been older than 20. There was something earnest about him, a nervous energy that reminded Daniel of himself years ago before he learned how heavy the truth could be. Daniel gave a small smile. "Depends what they're saying." The young man laughed awkwardly. "They said you exposed something big, that you took down some corrupt people." Daniel hesitated. "It wasn't just me." "But you did something," the young man said. "That means something, right?" Daniel met his eyes. For a moment he wanted to say yes, that it mattered, that the world was better now. But the truth was more complicated. "It means I tried," he said softly. "Sometimes that's all you can do." The young man nodded as if trying to understand a language he hadn't learned yet. Then he left, his footsteps fading into the background hum of the restaurant. Daniel watched him go, then looked back out the window. The world outside looked the same people, the same noise, the same fragile balance between chaos and calm. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. He could feel it. The Bureau would rebuild, new systems would form, new faces would take charge. The cycle would continue, maybe cleaner, maybe not. But somewhere in that cycle, a seed of doubt had been planted. The kind of doubt that made people ask questions, look closer, demand more. Maybe that was enough. Maybe truth didn't need to save the world all at once. Maybe it only needed to wake it up, one story at a time. The bell above the door jingled as Evelyn walked in. She looked tired but lighter, as if she'd finally exhaled after holding her breath for days. She spotted him, smiled faintly, and joined him at the booth. "You disappeared," she said, wrapping her hands around a cup of tea. "Needed to see how it all looks from the outside." "And how does it look?" Daniel glanced out the window again. "Quiet, but I think that's how change starts. Quietly." Evelyn nodded, following his gaze. "They're already spinning the story. Porter's being painted as a lone bad actor. The Bureau says they're restructuring oversight." He gave a small, almost tired laugh. "Same script, new actors. Still," she said, "you did the right thing." Daniel didn't answer at first. He let the words settle in the space between them. Then he said, "I'm not sure right and wrong mean much in systems like these. But truth always finds a way out." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning through the fog, revealing more of the city's shape. People passed by, faces illuminated for brief moments before disappearing again into the flow. Evelyn finally broke the quiet. "What now?" Daniel looked down at the recorder still resting on the table between them. Its red light blinked faintly. "Still running, still recording." He smiled faintly. "We keep telling the stories they don't want told." She tilted her head. "And if no one listens?" He met her eyes. "Then we say them louder." A long pause followed, filled with the hum of the restaurant, the clink of dishes, the murmur of conversations that would soon be forgotten. Then Evelyn stood, her voice softer now. "You ever wonder if people like us ever really win?" Daniel's gaze drifted back to the window. The sun had broken through completely now, reflecting off the wet pavement, turning puddles into mirrors. He could see his own reflection, tired, older, but steadier somehow. He answered without looking away. "Maybe winning isn't the point. Maybe the point is to keep fighting for a world that doesn't exist yet." Evelyn smiled, a small, weary smile that still carried hope. "Then I guess we'd better get back to work." She left a few bills on the table and walked out into the light. Daniel stayed for a moment longer, finishing the last of his cold coffee. The taste was still bitter, but it no longer stung. As he stood to leave, the teenager at the counter called out, "Hey, sir!" Daniel turned. The kid pointed toward the booth. "You forgot this, it was the recorder." Daniel picked it up, thumb brushing the worn plastic. The little red light blinked again, still capturing everything, even the silence. He slipped it into his pocket. Outside, the city had come fully alive. Traffic lights blinking, horns honking, voices overlapping in a familiar chaos. But beneath it all was a different kind of rhythm, one Daniel hadn't noticed before. It wasn't the noise of machinery or power or fear. It was the pulse of people, imperfect, defiant, enduring. He walked down the street, blending into the crowd. The storm had passed, but the air still carried its memory, that charged stillness that comes after lightning. When the world feels fragile and new, somewhere above, the clouds broke apart completely, revealing a clear, impossible blue. Daniel stopped for a moment and looked up. How much truth could a world built on illusion bear before it began to change? And how many lies had to fall before someone finally saw it clearly? He didn't know. Maybe no one did. But for the first time, that not knowing didn't feel like defeat. It felt like possibility. He kept walking. The wind caught his coat. The city's noise swelled around him. And for a fleeting instant, it all felt weightless, and as if every story, every choice, every moment of defiance was just another heartbeat in the long, unfinished rhythm of truth. And then, as the light turned green and the crowd moved forward, Daniel Cross stepped off the curb and disappeared into the living hum of the city. One man among millions, still carrying the storm quietly inside him. Rain came down in steady sheets, a cold curtain that blurred the city's neon lights into streaks of liquid color. Each droplet carried a pulse, an echo of the chaos that had been set in motion. The Halcyon truck rolled through the empty streets, its tires hissing against wet pavement, the hum of its engine swallowed by the storm. Daniel sat behind the wheel of an unmarked sedan, eyes fixed on the glowing taillights ahead. Evelyn sat beside him, silent, her fingers tightening around a small recorder she'd brought. Old, analog, almost sentimental. The kind of thing people used when they didn't trust the digital world anymore. Neither spoke for miles. The only sound was the rhythm of the rain and the distant thunder chasing them across the city. Daniel's jaw was set. He'd been awake for 42 hours. His mind had crossed that fragile line between exhaustion and clarity, where everything sharpens into something painfully real. The truck slowed as it reached the industrial district, a maze of warehouses and loading docks shadowed by floodlights. A security gate loomed ahead, half open. Daniel killed the headlights, letting the car drift to a stop behind a stack of crates. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "You sure about this?" "No," Daniel said. "But it's the only place left where the truth could be hiding." They got out. The rain hit hard, drumming against their jackets, soaking their hair. In the distance, two men in reflective vests unloaded crates from the truck. Each one bore the Halcyon logo, the same symbol Daniel had seen stamped on documents, sealed envelopes, even bureau reports. It was everywhere. He crept closer, staying low between the containers. The air smelled of damp cardboard, fuel, and something metallic, faint but wrong. Evelyn followed, holding a small camera under her jacket. A loud clang broke the rhythm of the rain, one of the workers dropping a crate. The sound echoed sharp and hollow. The man froze, glancing around nervously before prying open the box to check the contents. Daniel and Evelyn froze too, peering through a gap in the crates. Inside the box were not food products. No sealed bags of processed meat or frozen goods. Instead, rows of small metallic vials gleamed beneath the warehouse lights, each labeled with a serial number and a barcode. Evelyn's breath caught. "What is that?" Daniel's mind raced through possibilities: medical samples, pharmaceuticals, biomaterial. But the truth snapped into focus the moment he saw the faint bureau insignia etched into one of the caps. "Classified compounds," he murmured. "Experimental materials. They're smuggling government research through the food chain." Evelyn turned to him, eyes wide. "You mean they've built an entire distribution web to move whatever this is, under the cover of legitimate shipments?" He took a step back, realization hardening like ice in his veins. Porter hadn't been hiding money. He'd been hiding something far worse, something alive inside those vials. Then came the sound of a door slamming open. Voices. Footsteps. Daniel grabbed Evelyn's arm, pulling her deeper into the shadows. From the loading bay emerged a figure holding an umbrella, moving with quiet authority. Even through the rain, Daniel recognized him. Porter. He looked immaculate. Not a drop of rain on him, his presence cutting clean through the chaos. A man used to standing above the storm. One of the workers approached him, gesturing nervously toward the open crate. Porter glanced inside, then smiled thinly. "Seal it. Now." His tone was soft, but his voice carried the weight of command. The worker obeyed instantly. Porter turned slightly, as if sensing something in the air. His eyes scanned the darkness beyond the floodlights. For a moment, Daniel thought he was staring straight at them. His heart thudded so hard it almost drowned out the rain. Then Porter spoke again, not to the workers, but to someone standing just beyond view. "I told them to shut this operation down weeks ago. The Bureau's already bleeding enough attention. Find Cross before he finds us." Daniel felt the words like a knife twisting slowly. Porter wasn't running from him. He was orchestrating this entire cover-up with people inside the Bureau. He pulled Evelyn back, whispering, "We need evidence. We can't just expose this. We have to prove it beyond denial." They slipped toward a side entrance. Inside, the warehouse stretched out in rows of stacked crates, each labeled and tagged. Computers hummed softly in the corner, monitoring shipment routes and inventory. Evelyn began recording everything: the vials, the manifests, the digital logs. Then something on the monitor caught Daniel's eye: a live feed of the loading area. The camera shifted slightly, zooming in, until his own reflection appeared on the screen. A voice came from behind them. "You shouldn't be here, Agent Cross." Daniel froze. Porter stood in the doorway, umbrella gone, rain glistening on his coat. He didn't look surprised, just tired. Evelyn turned, her hand trembling slightly as she lowered the camera. "How long have you been watching us?" Porter stepped closer. "Long enough to know you were never after the truth. You just wanted to feel like the hero in a story that stopped being noble a long time ago." Daniel met his gaze, anger tightening every word. "You're poisoning the system. You're turning justice into a business." Porter smiled faintly. "Justice has always been a business. I just stopped pretending otherwise." He gestured toward the crates. "Do you even know what's inside those?" Those compounds keep millions of people fed, medicated, functioning. Without them, the economy collapses in a week. You think I'm the villain? I'm the one holding this country together while your bureau hides behind reports and press releases. Evelyn's voice was quiet but cutting. By lying. By stealing. By surviving, Porter snapped. His composure cracked for the first time, the calm mask slipping. Do you know what happens when people lose faith in their institutions? They burn everything. And you, Agent Cross, hinted you'd light the match just to watch it fall. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost sacred. The rain outside had softened, but the tension inside the warehouse thickened until it was hard to breathe. Daniel took a slow step forward. You built this to save yourself. Not the system. Not the people. Porter's eyes darkened. Maybe. But if you expose this, you won't destroy me. You'll destroy everything. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. The weight of it all pressed down. The files, the recordings, the truth that could unravel an empire but take the world with it. Evelyn's voice broke through the silence, steady and sure. Sometimes things have to break before they can be fixed. Porter sighed, almost sadly. Then I suppose this is where the story ends. He reached into his coat. Daniel moved faster. The next second was chaos. The flash of movement, the crash of a crate, the metallic echo of struggle. Porter's weapon hit the ground, skidding across the floor. Daniel grabbed him, forcing him against a stack of boxes, the two men locked in a desperate tangle of rain and rage. Porter's voice came in gasps. You think you're different from me, but you'll end up the same, another ghost serving a system that forgot you exist. Daniel pressed harder, his jaw clenched. Maybe, but at least I'll go down fighting the right side. Then the sound of sirens cut through the storm. Red and blue lights flared through the warehouse windows. Evelyn had triggered the emergency transmission. Reinforcements. Porter's expression flickered between fury and defeat. You've no idea what you've unleashed. Daniel stepped back, breath ragged. Maybe not, but it's out now. Agents swarmed in, shouts and orders echoing through the vast space. Porter was pulled away, still smirking faintly, as if the ending had been written long before tonight. Evelyn approached Daniel, her eyes reflecting the flashing lights. You did it, he shook his head slowly. No. We just found the edge of it. Outside, dawn was breaking through the clouds. Pale, uncertain light bleeding across the wet city. The storm had ended, but the air still trembled with its memory. Daniel stood at the threshold of the warehouse, watching the trucks being seized, the vials catalogued, the agents moving like ants in a machine too big to comprehend. He thought of Porter's words, the system eating itself, the illusion of order holding chaos at bay. Maybe Porter had been right about one thing. The truth didn't save people. It changed them. It broke them open and left them standing in the rain, wondering what came next. Evelyn joined him, handing him the recorder. We'll have to make a report. Daniel looked at it, then at the sunrise. No, he said softly. We'll tell the story. She nodded. The first light hit the puddles, scattering gold across the ground. The city stirred awake again, unaware that beneath its streets and stories something vast had been exposed. Something that wouldn't disappear just because the storm had passed. As Daniel walked away, the sirens faded behind him. The truth was out there now, heavy, imperfect, and unstoppable. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the quiet weight of purpose settle back into his chest. Not victory, not peace, but something harder, something real, the kind of truth that never really ends. Porter's office overlooked the city, a grid of glass and rain-slick streets glowing in the dim afternoon light. The storm from the night before had moved east, leaving behind a haze that blurred the skyline into watercolor. Inside, everything gleamed. Brushed steel desk, framed certificates, the faint hum of an air purifier masking the silence. Porter leaned back in his leather chair, swirling dark coffee in a porcelain cup. He was mid-50s, clean-shaven, sharp-featured, the kind of man who smiled only when he was winning. The phone on his desk rang once, twice, then a third time. He answered. Porter. Sir. A nervous voice crackled through the line. It's Carl. They came. Porter frowned. Slow down. It was the Bureau. Compliance Division. They shut us down. Said something about an audit. For a moment, there was only the faint hum of the air purifier. Then Porter asked quietly, "Who was the agent?" He said his name was Daniel Cross. That name landed like a weight in the room. Porter's eyes narrowed, a subtle twitch in his jaw. "Cross, I know that name." He leaned forward, fingers tapping the desk in a slow rhythm. "Listen to me carefully. Don't talk to anyone else. Not corporate, not the press, not the bureau. Do you understand? But they took everything, Carl." Porter's tone dropped. "If you want a chance to keep your license, you'll stay quiet." The line went dead. Porter set the phone down slowly. He stood and walked to the window, watching the city pulse below. The name Daniel Cross still echoed in his mind. A memory began to surface. A file from years ago. An internal case about a small diner that went under after corporate restructuring. A local food safety report had flagged the incident, and the investigator's name? Cross, he smirked faintly. "Well," he murmured, "some ghosts just don't stay buried." Across the city, Daniel sat in a small diner. Not a chain, not a franchise. Real plates, real coffee, a waitress who remembered faces. The kind of place his father would have loved. Rain streaked the window beside him as he scrolled through reports on his tablet. The audit had spread faster than expected. 4 more branches flagged. 3 pending investigations. Each one tied to the same supplier network under Porter's signature. It wasn't just negligence here. It was a system built to exploit loopholes, maximize profit, and bury accountability. Daniel rubbed his temples. The coffee in front of him had gone cold. His partner Evelyn sat across from him, flipping through a printed file. "He's going to lawyer up," she said. "Guys like Porter always do." Daniel nodded. "He's too smart to leave a trail. We'll need leverage. Something personal. Something he can't bury under paperwork." Evelyn studied him. "You've been quiet since last night." "What's going on?" Daniel hesitated. His reflection in the window looked older than he remembered. "Porter's name came up in my father's file. He was part of the regional restructuring team. The one that forced him to sell." Evelyn's expression softened. "You never told me that." "I didn't want to." He looked out the window, rain distorting the city lights into trembling lines. "I thought I'd buried it. But this feels like the same rot, just bigger." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of clinking dishes and low conversation filled the silence. Then Evelyn leaned forward. "If this gets personal, you need to step back. The Bureau won't protect you if they think you're compromised." Daniel gave a dry laugh. "The Bureau doesn't protect anyone. It just documents what's already broken." Outside, a car engine idled. Then headlights swept briefly across the window, pausing. Evelyn noticed it first. A black sedan parked across the street, its driver's silhouette motionless. Daniel followed her gaze. "You think that's coincidence?" "Not likely." Daniel stood, tossing a few bills on the table. "Come on. Let's see who's watching." They stepped out into the damp evening, coats drawn tight against the wind. The sedan didn't move. Daniel walked straight toward it, his boots splashing in puddles. The window rolled down halfway. A voice spoke from inside. Calm, measured. "Agent Cross, Director Porter would like a word." Daniel stopped. Rain tapped against the roof of the car. "Tell him I'll call him through official channels." The voice replied, "He prefers now." Evelyn placed a hand on his arm, a silent warning. But Daniel's eyes didn't leave the car. After a long beat, he opened the back door and slid in. The interior smelled of leather and faint cologne. Porter sat across from him, framed by the dim glow of dashboard lights. He smiled, not warmly, but like a man savoring a long-delayed meeting. "It's been a while," Porter said. "You've made quite a mess of my region." Daniel met his gaze. "Your region's built on lies," Porter chuckled. "No, Agent Cross, it's built on efficiency, something your bureau doesn't understand." Daniel leaned forward. "You falsified safety reports. You intimidated employees. You let spoiled food get served to families." Porter's expression didn't change. "Do you know how many people eat from my stores every day? Thousands, tens of thousands. And how many get sick? Almost none. Because I know how to manage risk." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're not managing risk. You're gambling with people's health." Porter's eyes flickered with amusement. "Tell me, Daniel, is this about justice or your father?" The words hit like a punch. Daniel froze. Porter leaned back, watching the reaction like a scientist observing a specimen. I remember him, Porter continued casually. Stubborn man. Refused to adapt. The world moved forward and he stayed behind. You've been chasing his ghost ever since. Daniel's voice came out low, dangerous. Careful, Porter smiled faintly. Oh, I'm being very careful. That's why I'm still here. And if you're smart, you'll close your file, hand it off, and walk away. Because the people funding this chain, the ones really profiting, they're not the kind you want to make enemies of. Daniel stared at him. Is that a threat? It's advice, Porter said softly. From one survivor to another. Outside, a flash of lightning lit up the interior. For a second, both men's faces were stark and colorless, reflections of each other's conviction twisted in opposite directions. Daniel reached for the door handle. Enjoy your coffee, Porter. I'll see you in court. As he stepped out into the rain, Porter's voice followed him. You won't find what you're looking for in the paperwork, agent. The truth isn't written down. It's bought and sold. The door slammed shut. The car pulled away, disappearing into the night. Daniel stood there for a long moment, rain washing down his face. Evelyn jogged over from across the street. What did he say? Enough, Daniel muttered. Too much. They returned to the Bureau's field office an hour later, soaked and silent. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the narrow hallway. Daniel dropped his coat, water dripping onto the linoleum. Evelyn followed him into the small operations room, where digital maps and case files glowed across multiple screens. She set her tablet down. We can use his confession. It wasn't a confession, Daniel said. It was bait, she frowned. For what? Daniel stared at the screen, where Porter's network of suppliers spread like veins across a map. For me, he zoomed in, and when there it was. A new name that hadn't been there before. Halcyon Distribution Group, a company with no official record until 3 months ago, now listed as the sole logistics contractor for Porter's entire region. Someone's cleaning house, he whispered. They're moving operations before the audit spreads. Evelyn looked at him, realization dawning. He knew we were coming. Daniel nodded slowly. Which means someone in the Bureau is feeding him information. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, the ground beneath the case shifting from corruption in a kitchen to something deeper, institutional. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the city unnaturally still. Daniel stared at the map's glowing lines, each connection pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Evelyn broke the silence. So what do we do now? Daniel's eyes darkened. We stop playing defense. He shut off the lights, leaving only the faint blue glow of the monitors illuminating his face. In that moment, the war between them and Porter was no longer about food safety or audits. It was about truth, who controlled it, who buried it, and who dared to dig it back up. But deep down beneath his resolve, a single question began to surface. One he hadn't let himself ask until now. What if Porter was right? What if the truth really wasn't written down? Because the people writing it had already been bought? Outside, thunder rumbled again, distant but returning. The storm wasn't done. It was just circling back. The night deepened into a silence that felt unnatural. Outside the Bureau's field office, the rain had left the world slick and gleaming. Streetlights reflected in long ribbons of gold across the asphalt. Inside, the hum of servers filled the air, low and constant, like the breath of something watching. Daniel sat alone now, the screens before him flickering with maps and data logs. The soft blue light cut sharp lines across his face, tracing the exhaustion in his eyes. He hadn't spoken in hours. Every lead they'd uncovered ended the same way. A wall of redacted documents, closed accounts, or shell companies that dissolved overnight. He leaned back, eyes closing briefly. Porter's words echoed in the hollow space between thought and conscience. The truth isn't written down. It's bought and sold. For the first time, Daniel wondered if he'd been naive to believe otherwise. A faint sound broke through the static hum. Footsteps. Light, deliberate. Evelyn's reflection appeared in the glass panel behind him, her expression unreadable. You've been here all night, she said softly. You should get some sleep. He didn't turn around. Sleep won't fix what's rotting in this system. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice quieter now. You think this is new? That corruption starts with Porter. It's always been there. You just finally saw the size of it. Daniel opened his eyes, staring at the screen. at the glowing network of lines stretching across the country like veins in an organism too large to kill. Then maybe it's time someone cut it open. She studied him for a long moment. You're starting to sound like the people we investigate. Daniel turned then, meeting her gaze. Maybe that's the only way to understand them. Something shifted in her eyes. Worry, maybe, or recognition. There's something you should see, she said. She handed him a tablet. On it was a string of encrypted messages intercepted from the Bureau's internal network. They were brief, coded, but one stood out. A message sent 30 minutes ago from an unlisted terminal. It read, "Cross is compromised. Shut it down before he digs too far." Daniel's pulse quickened. Who sent this? We traced the IP to the Bureau headquarters, Evelyn said. But the route's been masked. Someone high up. He scrolled through the metadata, his fingers trembling slightly. Then he stopped. There's a timestamp here. The message was sent from inside the director's office. Evelyn's face hardened. Porter warned you. He wasn't warning me, Daniel murmured. He was taunting me. He knew this was coming. The realization landed like a stone in his gut. Porter wasn't just manipulating the food chain. He had roots inside the Bureau itself. Daniel stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. We need proof, something that ties him directly to the director's office. Daniel, I'm done playing by their rules, Evelyn. If we wait for clearance, they'll erase every trace before sunrise. She hesitated, then nodded. Then we move now. They left through the back exit, the cold night air slapping them awake. The streets were nearly empty. Only the hum of passing trains and the distant wail of sirens. The Bureau headquarters was across town, a monolith of concrete and mirrored glass rising like a judgment over the city. As they approached, Daniel felt that familiar knot in his stomach, the instinct that something wasn't right. 2 security vehicles idled near the entrance, lights dim. Inside, the lobby was empty, eerily so. The kind of silence that isn't absence but anticipation. They swiped their credentials and entered. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering intermittently as if uncertain whether to stay on. Evelyn kept pace beside him. You realize if they catch us pulling internal data, we're done. Daniel's voice was low. If we don't, we're ghosts already. They reached the director's office on the top floor. The glass doors were shut, the blinds half drawn. Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears as he inserted a bypass card. The lock clicked. Inside, the office was immaculate, everything in perfect order. But the computer on the desk was awake, its screen alive with cascading lines of code. Evelyn frowned. Someone's remote accessing the Bureau servers. Daniel moved closer, eyes narrowing. It's coming from Porter's corporate network. He began pulling the data logs, transferring them to an encrypted drive. The progress bar crept forward. 12%, 24%. And when the screen suddenly went black. The overhead lights flickered. Then a low hum filled the air, the sound of power rerouting. Evelyn cursed under her breath. They know we're here. Daniel turned toward the door. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass, slow, deliberate. Then another. He gestured toward the side wall. Backup exit now. They slipped into a service corridor just as the main door swung open. Voices filtered through, muffled, official, calm. Too calm. Cross and Quinn are inside. Retrieve the drive. No harm unless necessary. Evelyn's eyes met his. Their Bureau. Not ours, Daniel said. They moved fast, ducking into a maintenance stairwell. The city's glow flickered through the narrow window as they descended, the echo of their footsteps bouncing off concrete. Daniel's mind raced. If the director was protecting Porter, then the Bureau wasn't an ally anymore. It was part of the machinery. When they reached the sub-level parking lot, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message. No sender. It read, You're looking in the wrong place, Cross. The real data isn't on the servers. It's in the shipments. Evelyn glanced at it. Shipments? As in food deliveries? He nodded slowly. Halcyon distribution. The pieces began to shift in his mind, rearranging into something far bigger. He's not just covering up food fraud. He's moving something through the supply chain. What kind of something? Daniel looked up. Something worth protecting with federal clearance. A car engine started nearby, not theirs. The headlights flared across the garage. Daniel and Evelyn ducked behind a pillar as a black SUV rolled past, scanning the lot. Time to disappear, Daniel whispered. They slipped through the side exit, emerging into the cold night once more. The city stretched before them, vast, uncaring, filled with the hum of secrets too big to fit in reports. Evelyn shivered slightly, her breath forming clouds. Where do we even start? Daniel stared down the empty street, the glow of a halcyon truck passing in the distance, its logo catching the light like a ghost. We start there, he said. We follow the trucks, she hesitated. And if Porter's right? If this goes higher than we can handle? Daniel's voice was steady now, almost calm. Then we stop asking for permission. The sound of tires splashing through puddles faded into the distance. The storm clouds were returning, darker than before, and as the first drops began to fall again, Daniel realized that the case he'd thought was about food, fraud, and one corrupt man had become something else entirely, a mirror reflecting back everything he'd ever believed about justice. Because if the Bureau itself was compromised, then maybe the enemy wasn't outside the system at all. Maybe it was the system. The door swung open with a metallic groan, the kind that slices through background noise and stills a room. Behind it, the kitchen stretched out like the backstage of a forgotten theater, flickering fluorescent lights, walls slick with years of grease, the air heavy with heat and the sour tang of spoiled oil. Steam hissed from fryers, and over the rhythmic slap of spatulas against griddles came low laughter. Two voices, sharp with confidence. Daniel stepped forward quietly, his eyes sweeping across the chaos. A young man in a stained uniform was scraping burnt residue from a grill. Another, older, leaned against a prep counter, rolling a label between his fingers, the kind used to mark expiration dates. The sticker was pale yellow, its ink smudged from being peeled and replaced. The older man noticed Daniel first. His grin froze halfway. Hey, who? Daniel lifted his badge again, voice calm but cutting. Daniel Cross, Bureau of Food Compliance. And unless that sticker is from today's shipment, you might want to start explaining. The kitchen fell into stunned silence. The young cook's scraper clattered onto the metal griddle. The older man, whose name tag read Rick, tried to laugh it off. This isn't what it looks like. Daniel took another step closer. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like someone's been falsifying expiration labels on meat that should have been thrown out days ago. Rick's jaw tightened. You don't understand. Corporate cuts corners all the time. We're just doing what we're told. Carl had followed Daniel into the kitchen by now, his earlier arrogance stripped away, leaving something raw, fear. His voice cracked. Rick, what did you do? Rick spun toward him. Don't act like you didn't know. You signed the nightly reports. You think those numbers magically lined up every week? Carl's face went pale. You told me they were estimates. Estimates? Daniel echoed softly. So when customers get sick, what do you call that? Collateral damage? The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The only sound was the low bubbling of oil, like an unseen clock ticking down. Daniel exhaled slowly, pulling a small recording device from his pocket and setting it on the prep table. This conversation is being recorded. Rick, you said corporate instructed this practice. Who gave the order? Rick hesitated. His fingers twitched. You think I'm dumb enough to say names on record? Daniel tilted his head. I think you're smart enough to realize that if you don't, you'll be taking the fall alone. For a moment, nothing. Then Rick's shoulders sagged. Regional manager, he muttered. Guy named Porter. He told us to stretch inventory however we could. Said food waste kills profit. Told me to relabel anything that looked passable. Carl looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Porter? He came here last month. He said he was tightening procedures. Yeah, Rick said bitterly. By turning a blind eye to anything that saved a dime. Daniel nodded, expression unreadable. All right. Both of you. No one leaves the building until I call it in. He turned to the doorway. You, he said to a teenage employee peeking nervously from behind the soda dispenser. Lock the front doors. Customers can finish eating, but no new orders. The boy nodded quickly, disappearing toward the lobby. Daniel pulled out his phone, stepping aside to call his partner. His voice dropped low, professional. We've got confirmed label tampering and possible management level involvement. I need a mobile lab and a regional warrant team on standby. When he hung up, the reality of the moment hung thick in the air. Rick sat on a crate near the cooler, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. Carl stood near the sink, eyes darting like a trapped animal's. "You don't get it," Rick mumbled after a long pause. "This place runs on pennies. They give us impossible numbers, tell us to optimize resources. You start bending rules because it's the only way to keep your job. 1 week turns into a month turns into a year. Before you know it, you can't even remember when you stopped caring." Daniel watched him quietly, something flickering in his gaze. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. He'd seen this story before, dozens of times. Honest people turned bitter by impossible systems. Greed trickling down through corporate ladders until it reached the hands of those least equipped to bear the guilt. He thought of his father, once a diner owner in a small town. The man had refused to cut corners, refused to buy cheaper meat, refused to reuse oil past its date. The franchise that opened down the street had no such conscience. 6 months later, his father's diner was gone. Daniel had joined the bureau after that, not out of ambition, out of vengeance disguised as duty. Carl's voice broke his thoughts. "What happens to me now?" Daniel turned toward him. "That depends. You can keep lying and take your chances. Or you can start telling the truth. Every detail, every falsified report, every policy you enforced that wasn't company sanctioned." Carl swallowed. "If I talk, I'll lose everything." Daniel's gaze softened. "You already have. The only question is whether you walk out of here with something left of your conscience." Carl looked down at his shaking hands, the grease under his fingernails, the sweat dripping from his temples. For the first time that day, he looked small, not arrogant, not powerful, just a man cornered by the consequences of his own reflection. The radio on Daniel's shoulder crackled. "Cross, this is Field Team 7. ETA 10 minutes. He pressed the button. "Copy. Proceed with standard containment." The noise in the kitchen began to change. Fryers hissed, ovens clicked off, voices in the dining area murmured with confusion as the sound of distant sirens began to drift through the open back door. Blue and red lights flickered faintly against the wet asphalt outside. Rick rubbed his face. "They're really coming, huh?" Daniel nodded. "You made sure of that." Minutes later, the first bureau van pulled up. 2 agents stepped out, one carrying sample containers, the other a clipboard thick with forms. They moved with the quiet precision of people who'd done this 100 times. As they began photographing the kitchen, Daniel stepped back into the dining area. The customers, a handful of teenagers, an older couple, a man in a business suit, were staring at the commotion, whispers rippling through the room like wind through dry leaves. Daniel approached the counter, the very spot where it had all started. The woman's refund receipt was still folded neatly in his pocket. He placed it on the register beside Carl's abandoned cap. He thought about how fragile the line between justice and humiliation could be. Carl had deserved to be corrected, but not crushed. The Bureau's job wasn't just punishment, it was accountability. Outside, the rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, drumming against the windows like static. It blurred the flashing lights, turned the world beyond the glass into a watercolor of motion and sound. Daniel stood there for a moment just listening. He'd been chasing cases like this for years, but each time it felt different, the moral rot always wearing a new disguise. Sometimes it looked like greed, sometimes desperation. Sometimes, like today, it looked like arrogance. "Agent Cross?" His partner, a tall woman with dark eyes and a quiet authority, approached from the back. "We've got confirmation on the label tampering. We'll need to bring them in for questioning." Daniel nodded. "Good. I'll handle the statements." As she walked away, he caught sight of a small notebook peeking from beneath the counter, Carl's. He opened it gently. Inside were handwritten notes, schedules, daily totals, employee requests, and, near the back, a page scrawled with rough figures. Beside one entry was a name, Porter. Underneath it, a single line written in frustration. "He says if I report it, I'm out. I can't lose this job. Daniel closed the notebook slowly. For the first time that day, he felt something almost like pity. He walked to the kitchen again where Carl sat beside Rick, both now silent. The noise of the agents moving equipment filled the background. "Carl," Daniel said quietly, placing the notebook in front of him. "You tried to write the truth once. What stopped you?" Carl stared at the page, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fear. It's everywhere in this business. You try to do the right thing, and they remind you how replaceable you are. I thought if I acted tough, if I controlled what little I could, maybe I wouldn't feel powerless." Daniel leaned on the counter. "Did it work?" Carl gave a hollow laugh. "For a while." The rain outside deepened, a steady percussion against the metal roof. Daniel looked at the two men, one broken by the system, the other complicit in it, and wondered if justice ever truly fixed anything, or if it just exposed the cracks people were too afraid to see. When the bureau team began sealing evidence bags, Daniel stepped aside to make another call. His voice was low, deliberate. "Get me the regional office. I want a full audit on every location under Porter's jurisdiction. Same label patterns, same suppliers. If he's been doing this here, he's been doing it everywhere." He ended the call and pocketed his phone. Carl looked up, almost pleading. "What happens to her? The woman from before?" Daniel hesitated. "She'll get her refund. Probably an apology from corporate. But she'll never know what really happened here." Carl nodded slowly as if that truth hurt more than the punishment waiting for him. Daniel turned to leave but stopped at the threshold. "Carl," he said without looking back, "the hardest part about justice isn't finding the guilty. It's realizing how ordinary they look." The words hung in the steam-filled air as he stepped into the dining area. The agents followed. "Gaiden, what if the man you just humiliated at the counter wasn't a customer, but the one person who could shut your entire restaurant down?" It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind that drags endlessly under the buzz of flickering fluorescent lights. Grease lingered in the air, fries hissed in oil, and the line at the counter twisted toward the door. Behind the register stood Carl, the shift supervisor. His cap was tilted just slightly forward, the way he wore it to make himself look in control. He had that smirk that came from being in charge of something, even if it was only a small patch of linoleum and the authority to void transactions. A woman stood at the counter clutching a paper bag, crumpled, stained with a dot of sauce. Her tone was polite, almost apologetic. "Excuse me, I think this was made wrong. I ordered no pickles and—" Carl cut her off with a dismissive sigh. "Ma'am, the sandwich is exactly how it's supposed to come. We don't do special requests after it's been made." Her voice trembled slightly. "But I ordered through the app. It says no pickles right here." She held up her phone. Carl didn't even glance. "Maybe you tapped the wrong thing." He pushed the bag back toward her, his voice rising just enough for the people in line to hear. "You can't just eat half the food and come asking for a refund." The customer shifted uncomfortably. A few looked away. The woman blinked hard, embarrassment burning in her eyes. "Sir," she said quietly, "I haven't eaten any of it. I just want what I paid for." Carl laughed. "Lady, you're not getting a refund. Next." That's when a man stepped out of line. Calm. Measured. Average-looking enough that no one noticed him until he spoke. He was dressed simply. Dark jeans, a gray hoodie zipped halfway up, and a baseball cap with no logo. He carried himself like someone used to watching rather than being watched. "Actually," he said, voice low but firm, "I think she deserves one." Carl shot him a look that could cut steel. "You got a problem, buddy? You can take it up with management." "Oh wait, that's me." The man smiled. Not the kind of smile that says everything's fine, but the kind that makes you wonder what he knows. He stepped forward and placed his hands on the counter. "Then let's start an order." "I'm pretty hungry." Carl squinted. "Fine, what do you want?" The man's gaze flicked up to the menu for a second, more out of politeness than indecision. "Let's do 2 double cheeseburgers, large fries, and a milkshake." Carl punched the order in, trying to reassert dominance. "That'll be $14.67. The man nodded, slid a 20 across the counter. His eyes lingered on the name tag. "Carl." "Thanks, Carl." Something in the way he said it made Carl hesitate. But the moment passed. He gave the man his change, turned to shout the order down the line, and went back to pretending the woman with the pickles didn't exist. She gathered her bag and left, her eyes glassy but silent. The man waited patiently by the pickup area, scrolling his phone. He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem like anything. When the tray arrived, he took it slowly, as though memorizing each motion. Then he turned, surveyed the restaurant, and walked to the corner booth beneath a sputtering light. For a while, he simply sat there, unwrapping the first burger, biting once and setting it down again. He watched Carl, the way he barked orders, the way he talked to his crew. Every movement was recorded silently, through a small lens nestled in the button of the man's hoodie. An undercover agent for the Bureau of Food Compliance, a quiet division that most fast food managers didn't even know existed. His name was Daniel, and he hadn't come for lunch. For the past 2 weeks, the Bureau had been receiving anonymous complaints about this franchise. Expired ingredients being reused, falsified cleaning logs, customer refunds denied under store policy that didn't actually exist. The reports described one supervisor in particular: arrogant, manipulative, rude, someone who'd created a culture of fear among the younger staff. Daniel was there to confirm it. But today the confirmation had come faster than he expected. He glanced at his watch. A discreet tap of the screen sent a silent ping to his partner waiting in the car outside. He took another slow sip of his milkshake. The clock began ticking. 10 minutes later he stood, tray in hand, and approached the counter again. Carl barely looked up. "Yeah? Hey," Daniel said evenly. "I think you gave me the wrong order." Carl groaned audibly. "Oh, come on. What now?" Daniel pushed the tray forward. "I asked for 2 double cheeseburgers, but these are singles." Carl gave him that tired, patronizing grin. "They look like doubles to me, bud. Besides, you already took a bite. You can't just—" "That's fine," Daniel interrupted softly. "I don't need a refund." That stopped Carl for half a second. "You don't?" "No," Daniel smiled faintly. "I just want to see how you handle customer complaints." Something in his tone sliced through the noise of the kitchen. Carl frowned. "What are you talking about?" Daniel leaned slightly forward. "Carl, right? Shift supervisor since March. You've denied 14 refunds this month alone, 3 of which violated company policy. You also signed off on 6 fake cleaning checks. I'm wondering, do you falsify those yourself or have your crew do it for you?" The color drained from Carl's face. "What did you just say?" Daniel set a small black wallet on the counter. When it flipped open, the badge caught the light, silver, official, unmistakable. "Daniel Cross, Bureau of Food Compliance. I've been monitoring this location for 2 weeks. The restaurant fell into stunned silence. The fryers hissed, but no one moved. Even the teenagers in the back froze, spatulas midair. Carl's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked around, searching for a camera that wasn't there, a manager that wasn't coming to save him. Daniel continued calmly. "You denied that woman's refund for a mistake the kitchen made. You humiliated her, and you did it on a recorded system that the Bureau will review." Carl stammered. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't." Daniel's tone softened, almost pitying. "People rarely do." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded paper, an official notice. He placed it on the counter next to the untouched burger. "This location is under immediate audit. I suggest you cooperate fully." Carl blinked rapidly, a thin sheen of sweat gathering on his forehead. "Wait, you can't just—" Daniel tilted his head. "Can't I?" He gestured toward the register. "How about we finish that refund you refused earlier?" The lady's name was printed on the receipt. Carl hesitated. Daniel watched him like a hawk. Slowly, Carl turned to the monitor, fumbling through menus. The employees behind him exchanged wide-eyed glances. "Good," Daniel said quietly. "Do the right thing. It's not too late to remember what decency looks like." The woman was long gone, but her dignity was being restored piece by piece through every click of that register. When Carl handed Daniel the printed slip, his hands were shaking. Daniel folded it neatly, slipped it into his pocket. "Consider this a reminder, Carl. Every job, no matter how small, deserves integrity." He turned to leave, tray still balanced in his other hand. But just before he reached the door, he paused. A faint sound caught his ear. From the back room, a muffled laugh. Then a voice. Man, I told you he'd fall for it. We've been switching those expiration stickers for weeks. Daniel froze. His expression hardened. Slowly, he set the tray down, his badge catching the light again. Carl's eyes widened. That voice came from his assistant manager. Daniel looked back over his shoulder. Carl, he said evenly, I hope you've been keeping your logs up to date. Carl swallowed. Why? Daniel's hand reached into his pocket, thumb tapping the small recorder. Because I think this audit just got a lot bigger. The hum of the fryers seemed to fade into silence as Daniel turned toward the kitchen door, the low murmur of voices growing louder. He pushed it open, and what he saw inside made his blood run cold. To be continued,